Hello and welcome to Knitter Matters. For those of you who haven't watched this before, I'm Cheryl Lampard. I'm a style and image consultant, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to my knitting studio. Now, I have two passions in life, apart from being a style and image consultant and my husband. I love knitting and sewing, and knitting in particular is one of those things that I find extremely therapeutic and relaxing. I also used to own a yarn store in London, Brighton in England called Yoma, which means hair of the sheep. I used to teach people to knit then, and it's my pleasure to do that for you now. Unbelievably, this is episode 16. So before we actually start on today, I'm going to ask the camera to move and I'm going to take my seat so we can get on with the Facebook Live. I'm going to take my glasses off. I see better without them at close distance. So before we start on today's main topic, which is knitting the abbreviations, I want to talk to you about a book that I find extremely useful. Now, I have a library of knitting books and I'm adding to them all the time, but I'm often asked my favourites, and that's a bit like comparing with oranges with apples. I like and enjoy them both, but for different reasons. And there are many, many books for beginners. And after all, Knitter Matters started as a way to teach people to knit while we're actually, all self-isolating, and it's gone from strength to strength. And I should also thank you all if you've subscribed to us on YouTube. We have our Knitter Matters Facebook page, of course, and we're also on Instagram, so you can follow us on any of those platforms. Anyway, the reason I really like this book is that it's not only just good for beginners, it goes beyond that, so to every sort of level. So I'm going to swivel around so I can turn the pages a bit. This one was published in 2018, so it's relatively new. But what I love is that it has everything that you need. If you're a beginner, you can use it. If you're intermediate level, there's some really good stuff here. If you're advanced knitter, there's advanced techniques. There's everything you might need in terms of stitching, how to do various stitching, decreases, increases, all sorts of knitting techniques, and so on and so on. It also, for more advanced knitting, it tells you how to go about designing your own knitting projects. If you want to make garments, there's a lot, this whole section is about that. And also in the back, there's the ratio knitting paper, which I've talked about before, knitter's graph paper. I've talked about the importance of that if you're designing your patterns. I don't think the camera's going to like all these little squares, but ratio graph paper is really important. So yes, you can get it online, but they've already provided this here for you that you could copy or just use a pencil to work on. Anyway, I highly recommend this book. If you only get one book or it's on your wish list for birthdays or Christmas or whatever, I would recommend looking at this one. I don't think you would regret buying it. It's by Vogue Knitting and it's called The Ultimate Knitting Book, completely revised and updated edition. Okay, let me get that out of the way. So today we are talking about knitting the abbreviations. Now, I know from the various knitting forums and that I belong to and the questions that I receive. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, I have to follow the cameraman's instructions and I don't always know what he's telling me to do. But I know that one of the biggest challenges that especially new knitters have, or knitters that are just, enjoy the process of knitting, but then want to sort of formalize that a bit more with some published patterns. One of the struggles they have is to really know what the abbreviations mean. Now, it's one thing to read them, but it's one thing to decipher their meaning, but it's not always clear how to do the stitch or the stitches. So I know we've looked at abbreviations in other episodes and we've looked at the specific abbreviations for certain techniques. So when we did lace knitting, for example, we looked at yarn overs, where you get holes, where you want holes. We looked at certain types of decreases with holes, yarn overs, yarn round needles. We'll touch on that again later. But So specific, when we've done specific projects or techniques, we've touched on all these things. But I thought it would be useful if I shared with you some of the main abbreviations that trip people up. Now, essentially, we're going to work from this abbreviation sheet. If you don't have it, let me know. I have it as a download, as a PDF. I'll be happy to add that, or just let me know and I can message it to you. And I wanted to look at some specific ones. The ones that we're going to look at are the ones that tend to trip people up. For the most part, all these are fairly self-explanatory, but these are the ones that tend to trip people up. So we're going to go through those. Now, I'm going to do it in a slightly different order because I realised this is in alphabetical order, which makes sense. But when you're knitting these or when you're actually working these stitches, it's sometimes easier to start with the more basic ones and then we go on to them. So I've got my kind of sheet here that I should be following and I'll be showing you what we're doing. So the first thing we're going to look at is, so this is the abbreviation. This is what you'll see in patterns, and they are really quite uniform across most patterns. If there is a particular technique that the designer wants you to do, they will usually specify how to do it in a special section on the pattern. But any pattern that really doesn't explain the abbreviations, unless you're a really competent knitter or really understand what you're doing, I would avoid them. You do need to know what they mean. But these are the basic ones, and they are uniform throughout most knitting patterns, or most English language knitting patterns, I should say. There are certain variations, but it's usually quite obvious what they mean when you actually read them. So I'm going to start with actually understanding the difference between the front and the back of the stitch or loop. Now, you're going to say to me, oh, Cheryl, that's just so basic. Yes, it is, but it's actually quite important. So I've got my kiddie needles out here. Hang on, I just need to move in a bit so you can see, hopefully. Yeah. So when you do a knit stitch, it's landing on the needle this way, okay? So it sort of sits that way. Sometimes when you do other stitches, it twists them. But this is the front of and back. This is the front of the stitch, obviously, and this is the back. Now, sometimes that's referred to the front and back of the loop. It's the same thing. And you'll see in a minute why I'm pointing this out. On a reverse stocking stitch side, it's the same thing. You know, this now becomes the front of the loop. That would be the back, or front and back of the stitch. So that's actually quite an important thing to know straight away. The next one we're going to be talking about is the KTBL. KTBL. I knit through the back of the loop. And we're going to do a PTBL. You purl through the back of the loop. Okay. So let me get my purl. I've divided up my knitting today a bit. Oh, and one thing I should say while I'm doing this, you'll sometimes see me with my needles stuffed through my yarn like this. I don't actually recommend that. I'm only doing that just so that the yarn doesn't roll about all over the table and look messy when I'm demonstrating. But I don't recommend get out of the habit of puncturing your yarn with your needles, because over time, if you keep doing that, especially certain yarns, you're going to split the yarn. And when you come to knit with it, it's going to be fluffy or it's going to be split. So try not to stab your needles through your yarn. In this instance, this is a sort of do as I say, not do as I do, but there is a reason I'm doing that. Okay, so when we knit through the back of a loop, I'll just do a couple of stitches first, simple knit stitches. This is simple. It literally means you are knitting through that back of the loop. So you go in, if I turn that over, you go in to that back of the loop, okay? And the reason that's done is usually you're twisting the stitch. I need some more yarn. You're twisting the stitch. And I'll do alternate knit with a twisted stitch and a non-twisted stitch. So the stitch is looped over the needle. This is normally the way we go in, but now I'm going to knit through the back of the loops. going to do another couple, and I'm going to knit through the back of the loops. Now you can see, I hope, fairly clearly there, and sometimes this becomes more apparent when you've usually purled on the other side, or maybe you purl through the back of the loops, which we're going to do in a minute. But you can see how that stitch is twisted. You can see how that one is twisted, and you can certainly see how that one is twisted, and you can see that actually very clearly there because I haven't knit the one next to it. That's really twisted round. So you're probably going to do that for a pattern, okay? When it comes to purling through the back of the loops, that's something that's just as simple. Sorry, my needles are a bit bigger here, so I'm going to have to, okay. This is where purling through the back of the loops. Okay, your yarn is at the front. Remember, when you're purling, your yarn is at the front. Now, this almost seems impossible, but it really isn't. What you're going to do, you're going to get that loop at the back. Okay, so normally we do that with a purl stitch. Purling through the back of the loop, you're almost sort of turning it round and you're picking it up that way. That's the only way you can really pick it up. If you do it that way, it's a knit stitch. You're purling, remember. So that would be the normal purl stitch. We're purling through the back of the loop. Okay, I'll do a couple more, just a couple of plain purl stitches. That's our normal purl stitch. Yarn is at front, but I'm going, at first this seems incredibly awkward, but you will get used to it. So your point of your needle goes that way, and then you purl it. Okay, I'll do one more. I'll do another purl stitch. Sorry, my needle here is a bit long, so it's kind of pushing my hands away. Turn that, and then like that. Now again, actually on the purl side, you can't really see the difference, but when I turn it, you can see, again, we have twisted our stitch. Twisted there, it's twisted there, and it's twisted there. Okay, so often with a pattern, you'll be knitting through the back of a loop, then purling through the back of the same loop on the way back, and you'll get a stitch definition. That's why you're doing it. Okay, I'll leave my purl knitting there for the minute. Now the next one we're going to do, and you'll see why I'm starting with the easy stuff. So the next ones we're going to do, we're going to knit KFB, knit into front and back of stitch. This is actually an increase. You're going to end up with 2 stitches on your needle. And then the purl FB, purl into front and back of stitch. That's also a single stitch increase. You'll end up with 2 stitches from 1 stitch. I'm going to keep using the same bit of knitting for the time being. So my first one, knit into the front and back of the stitch. So yes, you do this. You don't take this one off the needle yet. And then you knit into the back of the stitch. Now, of course, I'm going to show you that again. Let's just unpick that. Sorry. Oh, my yarn is splitting today. Okay, let's get a few more stitches that I can actually work with. Right. This is your normal way of knitting. So we're going to do exactly that. We're not pulling this off the left-hand needle, though. We are kind of twisting the right-hand tip of the needle into this back stitch. You're knitting through the back of the loop. You have now 2 stitches made from 1. Okay, I'll do it again. Knit, pull through. Do not take this one off the needle. Twist your needle if you need to, so you can see where it's going. You pick that up again on your right needle. Now you take the loop off. So you can see there that little bump. It creates an increase. Okay. And I know that looks like it's sticking out, but it's actually quite a good, I wouldn't say it's an invisible increase, but depending on the pattern that you're knitting, it kind of blends into the knitting. But that's what you do when you're knitting into the front and back of a stitch. I'm going to show you now what happens when you purl. This is a bit trickier, but you can do it. Trust me, you can. So I'll take you through this quite slowly. Purl. So this is how we would purl, obviously. We're going to do the same thing. We're not taking it off the needle. Now this is where you kind of have to be a bit, my cameraman's going frantic here. I'm trying to get the needle down and I've got long needles. And then you go into the back. If it's hard to do, it should be. It's a bit tight, is what I mean. Okay. I'm going to show you again. I have to be over here. Purl. Okay. And then you've got to wiggle that in there. If it's tight, that means you're doing it right, because you're not supposed to have a loopy stitch. Okay. I'll do it once more. Purl, you keep that on the needle, turn, and get that. You're going through the back of the loop. So you're purling into the front and the back of the loop. So exactly as before, you've got extra stitches on your needle. And on the purl side, it just looks like purl on the purl side, but on the right side, you've got those little bumps again. Okay. We're cracking on with these today. Okay. This is a really nice increase. Make one knitwise and make one purlwise. They're both invisible increases. That's a really handy thing to have, because some increases do show, and sometimes they're at the edge of your garment knitting or the edge of the knitting piece, so they're going to be absorbed into the seam when you sew it up. But if you have to make increases in the body of the knitting, these are good ones to know. And what you do here, these are simple. I'm going to go back to these needles again. I'm just going to unpick some of the stuff I've done so that I don't run out of stitches. Now what you do here, instead of knitting into a stitch, so for our make one knitwise, you look at this bar here. We're going to pick up this bar here. This is the bit that's this ladder, if you will, the rungs of a ladder that run down the stitches. You're going to pick that up. You're going to pick it with your left hand needle. You're going to get it on your left hand needle, and you're going to knit into the back of the stitch. Really nice increase. You can hardly see that there. A couple more stitches and I'll do it again. So you're going to pick this rung up. Left hand needle can pick that up, and you're going to knit into the back of the stitch. There we go. So you can just see that nestling there between the two knit stitches, and again there. See how nicely that snuggles in. I'll do it once more and then we'll do the purl version. Okay, once more. It's important that you knit into the back, because if you don't, you're going to get a hole. So you must knit into the back. Twist the stitch and then you don't get a hole. See, those are going to sit very nicely. You'll never see them. When you do it purlwise, I'm sorry I'm using big needles, long needles for this, but I only have so many sets of needles in one size, so cameraman's going mad here, but I'm just undoing a few stitches so I can show you without running out of stitches. And I want to show you on these big needles because you do need to see it clearly. Okay, right, so when it's a purl, make one purl. Again, it's the same thing. You're picking this one up. You're picking this one up. And all you do there is purl it. You don't have to twist that one. You're going to pick that one up and you're going to purl it. Actually, I'm telling you wrongly. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's the matter with me today. You do need to twist it, otherwise you do get the hole. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Scrap that last few seconds. Of course you need to twist it. I'm running ahead. You have to purl into the back. Okay, otherwise you do get your hole. Okay, you lift it, put it onto your needle. If you need to pull that out a bit, like that, you can, but you need to purl into the back of it. Okay, And then you see, again, that fits really nicely in. You can hardly see that. And by the time you've knitted up a few more rows, you won't see that. Really nice. But do remember to twist that one. I'm sorry I told you wrong on that. Okay. Let me show you one more time on that. Purl it. Pick up this ladder. Put it on your left-hand needle and purl into the back. Okay. Right. So I'm going now into pass slip stitch over. That's a really simple instruction, and I'll show you what that means. I will use these other needles now. So when you get the instruction to pass slip stitch, you often get it with pass, A slip stitch is simply this. You slip it onto the needle. And if you're doing it on purlwise, you'd slip it on purlwise. So unless the pattern says slip it to the other needle in a different fashion, you would always slip knit stitches knitwise, and you would slip purl stitches purlwise. Okay. So passing a slip stitch over, it's usually accompanied by a slip one, knit one, and then you have this as the slipped one. So you pass it over. That's normally what you do. Otherwise, it's simply just a slip stitch. So it's usually a knit one, slip one, pass, slip stitch over. That's often accompanied with a yarn over the needle, as in lace knitting. So that's a slip stitch. Now, I've just done the slip one, knit one, pass, slip stitch over. Now there are two. Let me do the next one. Okay, so you can also do a slip one, knit two together, and pass, slip stitch over. You're decreasing now. Okay, slip one, knit two together, pass, slip stitch over. Okay, you can see actually that this is the slip one, knit one, pass, slip stitch over. And you can see this is actually bulkier. Well, it would be because it's two stitches. Okay. And generally speaking, they're going to be accompanied by a yarn over, especially in lace knitting. But it might be that that's how you're shaping the garment. You're shaping maybe for a sleeve or the sides of a garment. Now, what I do want you to pay attention to is this next one. Make sure you don't get confused. This is why it's always important to read the abbreviation, because these two look so similar. SK2P and S2KP. Sounds like one of the droids out of Star Wars, isn't it? So we've got SK2P, which I just did, slip one, knit two together, pass the slip stitch over. You've got you're actually doing a left slant decrease there. This one is so similar, but it trips people up. It's S2KP, so you're slipping two and knitting one, then passing the two slip stitched over. So you're actually decreasing two stitches then, and you're doing it vertically. Now, I don't know if our camera can go up to Mabel, or if that's too big an ask, but here on this scalloped cowl here, this is what I've done here. It's a two stitch decrease, and it's going centrally up. It helps give this shape here. So I'm not using it to shape a garment, I'm using it to create these sort of bubbles here, but that's exactly this stitch that I'm just about to show you. Thank you. When the camera's ready to come back, I'm going to show you how to do it. It's really simple. It is very simple, but it's effective. Get that out the way. I'll keep the instruction there so you can see what I'm doing. On this one, I'm slipping two stitches. Actually, I can see that that's distracting. So I'm literally slipping two stitches. Now, I'm going to put those back on my needle in the way that they came off. Don't get that confused with a slip, slip, knit. A slip, slip, knit, you slip the stitches one at a time. And that's important, otherwise they will be twisted. So when you see SSK, slip, slip, and then it's usually a knit one, you do those stitches separately, slip, slip, knit. With this one, you're slipping 2 stitches together, so you're actually, it says slip 2. So unless it says slip, slip, it means you're going to do them 2 together. Unless the instructions tell you to do it separately, you're going to do them 2 together. So you're slipping 2 and you're knitting 1. And then you pass those 2 over. Okay? You can see the difference. I'm going to do another just knit stitch. We're slipping 2, we're knitting 1, and we're passing those 2 stitches over. And you can see, this is where we did the other ones, the 2 stitches, the knit 2 together and the slip 1 over. You can see that that's a left slanting decrease. You can see that this is now going straight up the middle. It's a vertical decrease. I'll do it once more time. Do it one more time. I can't speak today. Okay. I'm slipping. Oh, Cheryl. I'm slipping 2, and I'm knitting 1, and I'm right at the end now. But that's okay. Okay. So that's my vertical decreases there. Okay, there's 2 more little things I want to show you, as if I haven't confused you already, and myself in the process. We know about yarn over needles. We know how to do those. But there are sometimes... Is that okay? Okay, sorry. I'm getting the camera and upset with me. Sorry, I'm just purling out the corner here because I want to get some fabric on the needle. So a yarn over, we're going from the knit side. Oh. If we're going from the knit side, a yarn over is this. Okay. It might be a yarn round needle on the knit side if you want to create a really big hole, and sometimes you do. When we did the buttonhole for the cowl, I think it was a yarn round needle. And there's a honeybee stitch that you wrap the yarn around several times, and then you drop them on another row. But typically a yarn over needle or a yarn round means the same thing. Okay, depends where your yarn is. So if you're knitting, your yarn is at the back, so it's got to come round first. If you're on a purl side, your yarn has got to go all the way round to do a yarn over. Okay, and we did cover that in lace knitting. So this is where I do want my holes. Okay. On a yarn round needle, you'll usually see that instruction on the purl side row, but it can be referred to as several different things. YO or YON, yarn over needle, or literally yarn over needle, yarn over or yarn over needle. And I believe that it also, and certainly in Canada, I believe it sometimes says yarn forward or YF forward, yarn forward. It means the same thing. It's a bit confusing, I know, but it means the same thing unless there is a specific instruction that means otherwise. And again, yarn round needle. The last thing I want to show you that's not on my abbreviations list, but when I do a more advanced one, I'll put it on. It's called knit one below or purl one below. What you're doing here is creating a really nice stitch definition. I'm going to show you on the big needles first. I have some more yarn left. Oh, the mess here. Never mind. Let's get this out of the way so you can see it. Done on the floor. That one I'm going to need, that one I don't. Sorry, I'm working in a tight space here, so just forgive me. So K1B is when you, oh, I was on a purl row there, wasn't I? Okay. Let's start with it back to front this time. Okay, we're going to start with a yarn, a purl one below. Well, you do this creates stitch definition, and it's something that gets people in a knot, and there's really no need to. What you're looking for is the stitch below, the one that's on the needle. So your yarn below needle, you literally, purl 1B would be your purling, but you're using the stitch below. So you find this little bump here, and then you go in below and you purl. Okay, so I'll do a few. You find the little bump and you purl. It seems a bit alarming when you first do it, but I'll show you on the other side what happens. You often do this in a fisherman's rib technique. Okay, you find that little, okay, and you purl it. So I'm just going to whiz to the end here, then I'm going to show you what a knit one below would be. I'll just knit into the middle of the row. So what you would actually get is a lot more definition, and I would probably do something on this row. It might just be purling it, or there might be stitches either side of it. Depends what your pattern is doing. But the idea is that you create a greater definition. Okay, so you can see there's two kind of stitches that have pulled up. And as you would probably repeat that on each of those where you've done that first purl in the stitch below or first knit in the stitch below. You'd repeat that in the same way in every way, most probably, because then you'd get the sort of fisherman's rib, that defined stitch. Okay, so when it's a purl one below, it's the same thing. You find the stitch below it, and sorry, when it's a knit one below, you do exactly the same, but you're knitting it this time. Okay, knit a few stitches because I've got all sorts of things going on here because I had increases. Let me get past the increases that I did on that previous row. Oh, I'll get there in the end. Okay, and now I've got a twisted one. Here we go. So this, you locate the stitch below, you go in there, and you knit it. Do it again. What you must be careful of is not getting your yarn caught up and pulling this stitch off at the same time. Okay, at that point, you don't want to do that. You're knitting the stitch below. Okay. One more. You're knitting the stitch below. Okay, so you get that nice fat stitch. So your head is probably spinning now. I'm going to ask the camera to turn back up. I know that's a lot. I do know that's a lot, but I really wanted to just take you through some of those stitches because you will find them on patterns. I hope I covered some of your favourite or not so favourite ones, the ones that trip you up. But if not, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them either in this thread or maybe in another episode. But watch this again and let me know if there's any questions. In the meantime, stay well, stay safe, keep knitting, stay calm, keep knitting, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye for now.